Hey, this is Steve Wilmer, and I'm with Luke Wilmer, my co-host tonight. And welcome back to Restless, the podcast. You know, it's been a few weeks since we've been on, and you heard the story of Bob, which was incredible, which you don't like that word, do you? So I can't use incredible. So he was fantastic. And story, we got some good feedback from Bob and his story, and it touched a lot of lives. And tonight we have another guest that, you know, I'm really looking forward to, because his story, I think, will reach to a whole different group of people who probably desperately needs to hear what he has to say. But you know what? If you're thinking that maybe you need to share your story, and you need to think about this, because your story is unique. It's like your fingerprints. And there's a lot of value in it when you can share it. And if that's something that's tugging at your heart, we would really encourage you to write us, and you can do that at info@restlesspodcast.com, or go to our website at restlesspodcast.com. And there's a section there that says, tell your story. Why don't you drop us a line or two, and we can talk. And furthermore, you know, if there's something on your heart that just been aching, you know, we're all ears. We'd love to hear from you and even chat about what's going on in your life. So, Luke, you know, Jared, our next guest, you know, he has got a really cool story, and it's a challenging story at that, too. Can you share a little bit about that with us?
So, Jared's story is one of dealing with severe mental illness for virtually all of his adult life, and the challenges it presents just in terms of what that means for him in terms of how he fits into the world and his view on belief and how that interacts with dealing with the extremely unique challenges that someone in his position has to deal with that most of us are blessed to never have to experience anything like. Jared's story is undoubtedly a very riveting one.
You know, and Luke, that as we introduce Jared to come in and take us by the hand, take us all on that journey that he's had for a number of years, you know, a lot of that story, or at least a portion of that, deals with mental health and some of the struggles that he has had with that. And it's going to be a fascinating exploration of where faith, mental health, and just what's been going on in his life intersects, and where that journey is taking him right now. So having said that, Jared, would you just kind of jump in here and take us and all those who are listening today, whenever that might be, on your journey?
Sure.
And welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Little nervous, as I was saying before, but definitely excited. You know, I think probably the best start would be at the beginning. Let's go all the way back to my early childhood. Some of my earliest memories were in the church. I was raised in the church, Protestant Christian family, and I particularly remember my family helped to build a church when I was young, and even me at the age of probably like 4 or 5, maybe, we had our plastic shovels to help them break ground, and my recollection of that time and of the church and of Christianity was simply that, you know, it was a happy family. We knew everybody. You know, everybody looked like me, sounded like me, and so, you know, it was a situation where I looked forward to going to church on Sundays. I looked forward to going to church just in general. It was a building that I felt, even at a young age, you know, I felt like I'd taken it, played an important part in building it. And you know, it was there that, you know, my introduction to religion sort of happened there and at home. And, you know, some of my first memories are of being in church, particularly, you know, the music, singing. My mom is an accomplished vocalist, and I remember seeing her, watching her, you know, in the choir, and I always wanted to do that. And listening to her sing was really a powerful experience for me, um, and that's from that point on. I became very interested in singing, and it was interesting that church was the one place that I heard my father sing. And my father actually has a really good voice, although he probably would never admit it. And you would never hear him sing, anywhere else. And I don't think I've heard him sing for a long time, but it was something that stuck with me, that this is something that is an important part of belief. It's an important part of religion, is that expression, through song. And the other memories that I have are, like Palm Sunday, and of course it's great we get palms because now we can use them as whips to whip each other. I have 3 siblings, and I'm at the time I was the middle child. Later, my brother was adopted, my youngest brother, and so, and I was the only boy growing up, older sister, younger sister, and so I got to play the rascal, the class clown, and that's a role that but I also played sort of the mediator. And as a kid, I was a very sensitive kid. I think if you spoke to my parents, and also probably most people who knew me when I was young, I was a sensitive kid. I didn't like getting in trouble. I didn't like challenging the status quo at all. I was fairly subdued in some ways. And I as I got older, that stuck with me. This, I guess, sort of hesitancy to challenge authority, and I think that that played a big part over the rest of my life up to this point, but definitely my time in the church. When I was 8, my family made a big move. Well, to me, it was a big move. I mean, it was really only, about 90 miles, if that. But it was a different state, and so that was big, and we moved into a bigger house, new neighborhood, new friends, and that meant, new church. And we started off at a church which was I probably best described as non-denominational. We had been in a Presbyterian church before that, and obviously, at a young age, I didn't know what that meant. And I I had originally, I guess I don't know if that's what they call it, but I was maybe baptized or dedicated when I was an infant, because I think the Presbyterians, they don't do infant baptism. But when we got to this new church, there was the question of, do we need to get baptized again? Or do we need to get baptized in addition to what has already happened? And we did. So I was baptized. And at this church, we met in a middle school that I eventually went to. So I think there was definitely some negative connections there for me moving forward, as I became a teenager. But one thing I remember very, very, very clearly was this feeling that I wanted to be treated like an adult. I felt that I had a decent enough understanding of Christianity, and I was smart enough. I was a gifted kid. I was in the gifted program, and so I knew I was not stupid. Um, and that may have gotten to my head a little bit. Uh, and so, I was tired of going to children's church. I didn't, that was for kids, and kids, that's for my little sister. She was, 5 years younger than me. And I like, that's for those little kids. Like, I want to be here with the adults, learning with the adults, and reading the Bible, listening to the pastor. I felt like I could follow what he was saying, what he was teaching. And so, around the time that I was leaving, or at the end of elementary school, maybe beginning of middle school, they offered a class at my church on creationism. And I wanted to take it, but it was only offered to adults. It was an adult class. And my parents, they felt that I could handle it. And so they spoke to church leadership, and they were like, yeah, Jared can take it. They didn't really feel that I probably would be keeping up, but at least that's what I probably imagined. They were thinking, oh, well, he's like 12 years old. He probably is not going to grasp all the concepts. But they gave us a book. I don't remember what the book was called, but I read that book in like 3 days, and then I read it again. And by the time the first class started, I was there with like questions. I was like, what about this? What about this? What about this? And I think after the first or second class, the instructor of the class was impressed with the fact this 12-year-old kid is asking these questions that nobody else is asking. Like, and I was, I had expanded my research into other books, and I was reading well above, I guess, my weight class, so to speak. Even at that age, I was, reading at like a 12th grade level, probably more like a college level. But so what that meant to me was that it was the first instance where I challenged authority. I challenged the status quo, and I got a glimpse of what what that might look like in terms of what sort of information was available to me. And so that, looking back now, that was sort of the beginning of the end for me in terms of Christianity and my belief. Because I went to the pastor, I went to other adults because I had questions. They were innocent questions, but most times people, didn't have good answers. I was asking questions that probably they had never thought of, or if they had thought of, they, hadn't thought of them very deeply. And at the time, I don't think it registered, but there was this sort of, I guess, seed that had been planted, and this feeling that maybe these people who I want to be like don't have all the answers. And so, as I transitioned into middle school, my family left that church and went to a Baptist church, Southern Baptist. And I was thrilled because my best friend went to church there. And him and I, we were teenagers, so it was like, we go to church, that's where the girls are at, Meet the girl, we hang out, we get to hang out with girls. And we kind of had the run of the place. We get away with stuff because his father was one of the pastors, and so we it was actually something that I looked forward to, but not because it was any sort of. I wasn't like, ooh, I get to go read the Bible and learn about God and Jesus. It was like, oh, I get to hang out with my friend and look at girls and try to talk to them in really awkward ways. So I interestingly enough, when we got to the Baptist church, they have a different baptismal practice. They do full immersion, and you have to be an adult. You have to be able to make a decision to have that done, and you have to have sort of, I guess, the wherewithal to make that decision, and that usually comes at adolescence. And so at the age of 13, I got baptized again. My dad also had to get rebaptized, and I have this really clear memory because he was going to become in order to become, I guess, a deacon or a elder in the church. It was important that he get baptized in the way that the church gets baptized. The sprinkling, doesn't work for the Baptists. You got to go all in.
Mm-hmm.
Baptist.
So the church did it. They had a traditional service. It was an older church that had been built on too. So there was a traditional church service, and there was what they call the contemporary church service, and they had them in different parts of the building. So they did all the baptisms in the old part of the church, and so you were up there, in front of everybody, and in order to get to the pool, I guess, I don't know if that's what you would call it. I'm sure it has a technical name, but you had to climb up backstage and then walk down these stairs, and you had to be real careful because they're very narrow. And then my dad went before me, and I was standing at the top of these stairs, looking down at him in this pool and looking out over top of the congregation. And my dad's not a small guy. He's probably 225 at the time. I don't know what he is now, but maybe more than that. But the pastor was not. He was a small guy. He was probably 5'7", $160 maybe. And I knew that my dad was worried because he is not confident around water, and he was worried that the pastor wasn't going to be able to get him up out of the water, and so I was, I guess, being slightly mischievous. I was sort of hoping that would happen, and that is what happened. Actually, I'm watching as my dad's getting dunked underwater, and the pastor is trying to lift. Nope. He's planting his feet, spreading his feet out, really got to get some lever, until finally my dad's pushing off with one hand to get himself out of the. It was pretty hilarious for me. So I don't actually remember my own baptism. I remember my dad's second baptism. I think it was his second baptism. Might have been his third. I don't know. When you switch around churches a lot, you end up with, I guess it's a hat trick, they call it in hockey.
Sure. So this baptism is the one you remembered.
Yes. Yeah. I had a perfect seat for the whole thing, and that as much as I enjoyed that, it was just another instance of where I, was why? I was why do we have to do this?
Again.
Yeah, why again?
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't have a good answer. other than like, that's just what they want us to do. Other adults that I spoke to didn't have a good answer. And I just sort of was like, that's weird. You would think that once you do it, and that's it. So these little tiny cracks started forming for me in the foundations of my belief. And by the time that I got to high school, I was very confused. I think that's happens for a lot of young people, but I was particularly confused about religion because I didn't see it in people's everyday lives. All I saw was the dogma. I didn't see people living their faith. And I mean, I didn't see it in my parents. I didn't see it, like anywhere. And that's challenging. I mean, well, I won't say it wasn't anywhere. I would say that it wasn't at the level that I thought it should be at. There were a few people that I was impressed with. I was impressed with my older sister, who was about 3 years older than I am. And well, she was 3 years older than me then, and she still is 3 years old. And so she was in high school, and I was also in high school at this point. So I think she was a senior and I was a freshman, something like that. And my family decided that we're not going to be Baptists anymore. We're going to go back to the non-denominational church that we had left previously. And I was not happy about that, because at least at the Baptist church, I could hang out with my friends. Now I got to go to this place where nothing is happening, and I got to listen to all these people talk about the same boring crap. And it was frustrating for me to see my sister and be part of a youth group, and have these youth pastors, sort of talking about all of these ideas, but they never really connected with me. I knew enough about Christianity to know how to act so that I looked Christian. And I knew the things to say. I knew how to pray. There were people have these things that they say when they pray. The way you open a prayer, the way you close the prayer, certain words and phrases. And by mimicking those things, people were like, "Oh, look how devout this young man is." And that was really sort of the schism where I became two people. One person that was that everyone in the Christian community, in the church community, could see me. My teachers, it was this good kid. And then the underside, or the flip side of that, was this other kid who really just wanted to have fun. And so, in high school, I was introduced to a lot of different things. I was playing sports, and I'd always been playing sports, but I was doing drama and like every activity under the sun. And I was also introduced to drugs. It was the first time I smoked cannabis or marijuana or whatever you want to call it. Was I guess I was 15 years old. And I mean, it was a very, very meaningful experience for me. The first time I did it, I was like, this is it. I found it. Like, this is, I'm having fun with my friends. We're doing something unique. I feel connected to the world. I feel connected to the people around me. Things make sense. And it also gave me kind of a little bit of a rush, like a thrill. Like I knew I was breaking the law. I knew I was doing stuff that was would have been very frowned. That's an understatement. Would have been severely punished if my family had my parents had known about it. So I continued along that road of two lives, and as I became more disgruntled, I guess is a good word, with Christianity and with the church, my parents started to backpedal a little bit. I was allowed to listen to secular music, whereas before I was not allowed to do that. I was allowed to date, before I wasn't really allowed to do that, even though I didn't really go on any dates. But luckily, I guess you could say, something sort of stepped in. Something, it was called it's an organization called Young Life. And when I say it stepped in, I mean that it provided an avenue for me to continue to act like a Christian, and for my parents to be happy that that is what I was doing, and for me to still be able to have a little bit of fun and hide all the other stuff that I was doing. Because if I got to be part of these various Young Life programs, and I'm bringing in people, other students, my peers, to various events and that kind of, it was like, oh, look how great of a Christian this guy is. Like he's saving people. And I just remember the first time that I was at a party in high school, like a keg party, something like that. Although I don't think we had a keg. Somebody came up to me and they said, Jared, what are you doing here? And I was like, well, I'm hanging out, drinking, smoking, what does it look like? And that person, they were like, well, I thought you didn't do this kind of stuff. And then one of my friends walks over and says, yeah, Jared's a huge hypocrite. And I was, I sort of laughed at the time, but it also kind of like somebody punched me in the stomach. I was like, yep, yeah, they're right. It wasn't a good feeling. Because I didn't really have a good explanation. They had hit the nail on the head. And so I continued doing Young Life, and that lasted all the way through high school. And then something sort of new emerged around my junior year, about the age of 17. I joined the wrestling team, and I'd never wrestled before, so it was challenging. I'd played football. I was a starter on the varsity team, so that was very familiar. I was good at it. I'd sang before. I was a lead in the musicals. I was in the 2 different, choirs. But this was new. It was challenging, and the anxiety of competing in a individual sport is very different. I played baseball. There's 9 guys on the field. Play football, 11 guys on the field. You're in a choir. There's always these situations where you're not the center of attention. Then all of a sudden, except for maybe when you're playing baseball and you have to bat, but I was really, really good at baseball. So I get out, in front of the crowd at a wrestling match, and I'm not good. I think my junior year I was like 8-15 or something like that. It's just not good. And there were times that I would get out there and I would have what I now know to be almost panic attacks, where I would be incredibly anxious. And a couple times, I lost on purpose. I just threw the match so that, like, I could get pinned in the first 30 seconds and just leave.
Just get it over with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, so I started to have problems with, energy level. I wouldn't want to go to school in the morning. I think there was one time that I remember that, like, I didn't want to go to school, and normally my parents would just force me. They'd be like, "You got to go," and I would go. And then there was this one time that I just was like, "Nope, I'm not going." My mom tried to force me, and then finally, of course, she called in the big guns and called my dad, and even all his yelling and screaming, I was like, "I'm not going." So he gave up, and then I guess around about lunchtime, my mom came down again. I had a room in the basement, and she would sort of quietly knocked on the door and said, "I'd like it if you would go to school. I think you can go to school now." Okay, I'll go. And I mean, that was really the first time. Now, what I know now is that I was beginning to experience depression. And so junior and senior year, a couple little, bouts of mild depression, anxiety. No clue that was what was happening. And, senior year, it's like, oh, what do I do now? Everybody's planning to go off to college or do this or that. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, I don't want to do any of these things. I just want people to leave me alone. I'm tired of being in front of everybody. I'm tired of being, the star. I'm tired of all this stuff. Like, I'm tired of having to perform for people. Even like I'm tired of, performing, pretending that I'm a Christian. I'm tired of all that stuff. And my parents were like, "Nope, you got to go to college." And so I was like, "Well, I'm gonna stay in state." And so I, gonna apply to 3 different schools: University of Virginia, Virginia Tech, and James Madison University. And I looked at the requirements for the application for UVA. Backing up a little bit, I was a good student. I wasn't a great student. I had like I think I had like a 3.2, but I had like ridiculous amount of extracurriculars. I had a really high SAT score. So I probably could have gotten into all 3 of the schools. But I looked at the UVA application. They were like, you got to write this, I don't know, some ridiculous, like, 10,000 word essay or something. I was like, nope, not doing that. Plus I didn't want to go to the school where my older sister was at. Just was very, we would go to the football games. It was very pretentious there. People would ties to football games. And I was like, that, I just can't do that. And so the tech application, I got about halfway through and ended up finally finishing it, but there was a good amount of stuff that was optional. Highly recommended, but still optional. So I didn't do that part. Mm-hmm. And obviously I didn't get into either of those 2 schools. JMU was the only application that I actually fully finished because it was it required the least amount of work. Got into JMU. I was thrilled about that because I was getting concerned about being one of those people who didn't do anything after college. Like, I didn't want to be like a loser. These people I had in my head, I didn't know who they were, but so August 2002, I head to JMU, and everything changes. When I got there, it was the first time that I had lived with people who weren't my family members, or never spent extended periods of time with people who that I wasn't close friends with. And pretty much all of my friends I would have considered family growing up. So all of a sudden, you are thrown into a environment that is very different, with new people, and you're put under the pressure and stresses of new responsibilities. You have to act like an adult and get your food and do all these sort of things that I didn't have to do growing up. But one of the biggest things that was difficult for me was I was suddenly surrounded by people who didn't believe like I believed. They didn't believe like my family believed. They didn't believe like any of the churches that I believed. I'm not saying that there were no Christians at JMU. There actually were a lot, and I, joined an organization called InterVarsity, and I continued to be involved with Young Life at the collegiate level. But the variety of religious background, experience was much more varied. And as I interacted with people, I remember this one woman, or girl, or peer student. Her name was Thalia, and she was very cute. But she was very about as far removed from Christian as you could get, I guess, in the direction of maybe a blend between like spiritualism, like sort of almost like a new agey kind of thing, and so that was very frightening, but also appealing to me because it was something different. It was a different perspective, and I met people that I would never have interacted with. I met Muslims, I met Jews, and they were my friends. It was the first time that I interacted with gay people, and I realized that they were people, and it was hard for me to reconcile what I had heard and experienced from the people that I had known growing up in the church, how they treated these different groups of people, how they referred to them. And so I continued to be involved in a small group with a couple other, I think it was probably about 8 guys, and we had a leader. I think it was through InterVarsity. And then I was also in the Young Life leadership training program initially. But by the end of the first semester that I was there, the other big thing is that I started drinking like heavily, which is also an important part of this story. So I was continuing to move away from who I had been. I was moving towards something. I didn't know what it was. I just knew it wasn't what I was. And I was happy with that. Because I didn't want to be a hypocrite. I realized that I was being a hypocrite. And I also realized that most of the people that I knew were hypocrites. I didn't want to be like them. So I continued to move away from the church and from Christianity. I remember there was a InterVarsity retreat that I went on, where we went off into JMU is in the Shenandoah Valley, in Virginia. It's a very beautiful area. And within an hour, you can be up in the mountains or at beautiful caverns. And so we were up, up in the hills and at this retreat. And I had felt for a while that when I would go and I would sing, or I would listen to messages or sermons or whatever you want to call them, or I would read the Bible, I didn't feel anything anymore. And it was particularly alarming for me that when I was singing, I didn't feel anything. Because that was the one thing that had always been the fallback. And so I was up in the hills with a bunch of other 18 to 22-year-olds, and we broke and during this retreat, and it was like, all right, go off in the woods. Well, it didn't have to be in the woods, but anywhere on the property, I guess, and have, the next hour, it's your time to spend some time with God one-on-one, pray, walk, sit, whatever. And so, I found this trail, and I wandered off into the woods because I didn't want to be around anybody else. Because I was worried that if somebody was near me, they would distract me, and I wanted to be ultra focused. Because I was sort of in a moment of, like, I guess crisis, you could say, where I wanted to hear the voice of God, but I hadn't for a long time. And so I sat down by this path. I looked around, made sure that nobody was coming, and I prayed as hard as I could, and I gave God, I guess, this ultimatum, which I think a lot of people probably are familiar with, is it's kind of like, show up or I walk. And God didn't show up. So I continued. By the end of the semester, I stopped going to varsity, I dropped out of the Young Life thing. And, that was a big deal for my family because Young Life was a part of my family background, our chemistry. I don't know what you want to call it, but we had a history with it. My parents did it. A lot of other people in my family did it. And so when I dropped out of that, they were like, oh, okay. So I go home for Christmas, and I think it's the first time that I don't feel at home. And I want to go back to JMU. It's the first time that I'm actively angry about it. Having to go to a church service on Christmas Eve. I'm like, I don't want to do this. This is stupid. Why do I have to do this? And I know that, I'd not wanted to do those sort of things before, but I'd gone with the flow. Because it was important to my parents. I mean, when I was a senior in high school, I had this sort of coming to head with my father, where we didn't really have a very good relationship. And I mean, he traveled a lot, he worked very hard. I was angry at him, very angry at him. And I think one time he came down to talk to me, and I told him that I hated him, and I told him to go bleep himself. Which, I mean, if you knew my family, that was unheard of. And he was really shocked, I think, by that. And we came up with this sort of agreement where I got to do what I wanted, as long as I did what my mom wanted me to do, which was go to church once a week. He was like, anything else? Do what you want. I had a basement entrance exit, so I could just come and go as I wanted. So finally, fast forward back to my freshman year, and I'm back home at Christmas, and I don't have that ultimatum over me anymore, where it's like, you have to do this. So I was very bitter that I felt like I had to do it. I had to go. Gotta go to church. I had started to look, doing my research. The whole nativity narrative is bogus. Blah 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 blah. And those were my first steps down the path of atheism. So when I get back from Christmas break, I guess I had a very significant event that happened. So I do have a friend, and I do mushrooms, magic mushroom, psilocybin, with him, which is a psychedelic, for those listeners who are not sure what I'm talking about. And it was a very powerful experience. It was very, very different from anything that I had felt before. I felt more of a spiritual connection during that and in the immediate weeks afterwards than I had ever felt in a church setting. But right around that same time was my first major depressive episode. So essentially, for about, I guess, almost like 6 to 8 weeks, I would rarely get out of bed. I didn't want to do anything. I just wanted to sleep all the time. I was very, 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 very unhappy. I would get out of bed to go to the bathroom. I would get out of bed to go get food. I would get out of the bed to go sing with my. I was in an a cappella group with a bunch of other guys. It was the only thing that I enjoyed doing. I also got out of bed to go party and drink, which those two things do not mix. Alcohol is a depressant. Very bad for people who have depression symptoms. So by the end of the semester, I guess about halfway through the semester, my grades are terrible, and I decide that I want to go on spring break. My friend who I sang with presented me an opportunity to go to Miami Beach, for spring break. For anybody who's between the ages of 30 and 40, you probably remember MTV Spring Break. So we went down, took the train. We didn't actually take, that was a different trip. Never mind. We took a minivan. We drove for 11 hours. It was awful. Overnight, yeah. And so we got down there, and only reason why this is an important part of the story is that one night we're out on the beach, South Beach, Miami. It's beautiful. It's the star, you can see every star. And there's this warm breeze coming off the ocean, walking along the sand, and you can see the lights of the boats out on the water, a couple miles off the coast. And we had met these girls earlier. We're like looking forward to hanging out with them later, but we had some time to kill, and for some reason, I don't know why it came up, but I was explaining to my friend John how I could swim out to the boats, which are probably 2 to 3 miles off the coast, if not farther, and not die. And he was like, "No, you would drown." I was like, "Not only would I not drown, swimming out there, I would come back and not die." And he was like, "No, that's impossible." He was like, "How can you even know that?" I was like, "Well, I'll tell you." So I took my toe or a stick or something, and I drew this line in the sand. And this is a lifeline, the average human being. And then at the end, or at some point on the line, I drew a circle, and it's probably about like 12 inches in diameter. And I was like, "This is the purpose of the average human." And he was like, "Okay, just explain what you're talking about." But so then I took 2 giant steps outward, and I draw this massive circle, hundreds of times the size of the circle. And I was like, "That is my purpose." Like, it still doesn't explain what you're talking about. I was like, and I drew another line that cut across the lifeline. If that lifeline, if I never reach, if my life ends here, then that means I can't fulfill that purpose. So there's no way that I can die right now because I haven't filled that purpose. And I don't know, I can't remember how he reacted, but that stands out in my mind because it became later. It became an example that I would use when speaking to psychiatrists and other psychiatric professionals to explain why I was ill. It was an example because it fits into the diagnostic criteria. So, flashback to JMU. We come back, and the rest of the semester, I'm still depressed. And I get to the end of the semester, and I failed every single one of my classes. Never done that before. And my parents, actually, my mom is coming down to pick me up, get all my stuff, move out, go back home for the summer. Comes down and has no idea about any of this. And I remember we went and got lunch at the dining hall, and after we had eaten, my stomach was killing me. I knew that I was gonna have to drop this bomb, eventually, because they're paying for my school, and they're gonna want to know what my grades were. And so we walk out of the dining hall down these stairs and this courtyard kind of area. And she's walking, and I just kind of stopped walking, and then just walked over and sat down on this, or like a stone bench. And I just burst out into tears. And she clearly had no idea what was going on. Sat down next to me, asked me wrong, and I was explaining to her what had happened. I was like, I failed at all my classes, failure. And she wanted to get details, and but I was still very upset. And I started to tell her about how I felt, not about what had happened or the results of the semester, but about what I know now are symptoms. And, neither of us had any idea what was going on. We didn't have any experience with it. Mental illness is funny like that. It just kind of kicks in the door sometimes. Usually just kicks in the door and it's just like, hey, I'm here now. I know you don't, you weren't expecting me, but here I am. And now you have to figure out what's going on. So that summer, I went to a psychiatrist for the first time in my life. And it was a place, it was actually like right across the street from where one of my friends, like a couple of my friends lived in this neighborhood. It was just a very oddly placed building. It felt like it should have been like a historical building, like an, and I don't really remember a whole lot other than they put me on something. I don't know. I've been on so many drugs. It's, you lose track of them after a while. I think I have a list somewhere. Everything that I've been on. Way too long. So we thought that was like how it works. Like that's how medicine works, right? That's how you're sick. You go to the doctor. Here's your pill. You take the pill. You're better, right? No, that's not how it works. At least not with this. So I get back down to JMU because we're all assuming that everything's hunky-dory now. Stuff has been resolved. So I'm back JMU and what happened the previous semester just repeats. Starts off okay, and as soon as stress starts building up, everything falls apart. So I ended up being at JMU for 2.5 years, 5 semesters. I had 3 mental health withdrawals. And a mental health withdrawal is just simply an after the fact where they say none of your credits counted, like you were never here. Which is helpful because if you want to come back, your GPA isn't totally shot from failing 36 or 45 credits or whatever it is. But I never really took advantage of the resources that they had there. I saw a therapist and tried a different medication, but so when I was 21, I was forced to leave JMU, which I was not happy about at all. Or I guess I was 20, about to be 20. In the final moments of my time at JMU, I was at a party and I got into an argument with a guy in my fraternity, and I pushed him, and he fell, tripped over a curb, and scuffed up his leather jacket and broke his digital camera. Obviously, doesn't sound very bad, but he pressed charges, and I got charged with assault and battery and destruction of property. Although I didn't know it, so when I left JMU, went home to Maryland, I became a interstate fugitive. Didn't know that. And I was away from JMU for about 6 months. And it was during that time that I really got into like hard drugs, like street drugs. First time I did cocaine, first time I did ecstasy. did some other psychedelics. It was not a very good time for me. And when I finally went back to JMU, I went back to JMU not as a student, but just because I wanted to get away from my family. My mom and my dad and my family didn't understand really what was going on with me. And they wanted to know why I didn't want to do anything. So I got into an argument with my mom one day. And it was the only time I've ever told my mom to, I use a very bad word. And I just threw a bunch of stuff in my car and just left. And I lived out of my car for a little while. But eventually found a place down in Harrisonburg where JMU's at, and decided that I was going to try to go to community college and get back into JMU, and that never played out. I worked a bunch of different jobs. I think I worked like 7 different jobs in the course of a couple of months, and I still was not being treated for an illness that I had. I was still fairly unaware of what was going on. And it wasn't until I saw a psychiatrist in Maryland that the word bipolar got thrown around for the first time when I was about 22. And he was doing what they called an intake, and asking questions like, do you ever feel like you're not, like you don't want to do anything, or you sleep a lot? And he was asking questions like, do you have any sort of family history of mental illness? And I was, yes. I let my dad answer that question with me, because his father had some pretty obvious issues, although I don't know if they were ever diagnosed. But and then I remember this really clearly, that he asked this question, that do you ever hear voices, or do you feel like you have a special connection with God? And I was like, yes, I have felt. And I immediately flashed back to that moment on the beach where I'm thinking to myself, God has a special plan for me. I knew that I wasn't speaking directly with God, not in like a conversational sense. But, that really stuck out in my mind. I was like, yeah. And I told him the story, and he was like, okay. And he kind of just took some notes. And at the end of it, he was like, I think you have bipolar disorder. And I was like, I think I have bipolar disorder. So he put me on mood stabilizers, or a mood stabilizer called lithium. And I was on it for maybe a couple of months before I was like, nope, not doing this. Lithium is a drug that has to build up in your bloodstream, within your blood to a certain level for it to be effective, and it can cause a mental dulling. That is something that a lot of people complain about, who are on lithium, or who take lithium for the first time. And a lot of people who are put on lithium are bright, creative people. I mean, that's kind of part of having bipolar disorder usually. They kind of go hand in hand. So it can be very frustrating when all of a sudden it's like somebody turns the lights out and you can't do what you once did. And that's why, bipolar disorder is hands down the number one illness that for where people stop taking their medication, because they want to feel how they used to feel, even if it's bad. You want to feel fully. And I felt the same way. And so I stopped taking my meds.
In some ways, is it like the deprivation is even worse?
Oh yeah, most definitely. Imagine as if you're an artist, right? And you have this amazing palette of colors that you get to work with. And then one day somebody says, here's the two colors you get to work with. Even if it was incredibly painful to work with all those colors before, you still want to work with them. So I went off my meds. Terrible idea. Hindsight is 2020. I got a lot of help from my dad. He came through in a major way. I was struggling. I was still in Harrisonburg. And he said, hey, let's start a business. Okay, great. Yeah. I was ready for any distraction. Something else. And so for I probably almost like 6 months, maybe longer. I don't know. Like, he came down every weekend, like 3.5 hours every weekend, and spent, the weekend staying with me to keep me from doing anything really stupid. I mean, that was the first time around that age was my, I guess that time was my first suicide attempt. Took a bunch of sleeping pills. Didn't work, obviously. I'm sorry. I make light of this stuff. When you've been living with it for this long, like, you have to laugh about it sometimes. So he's coming down every weekend, and initially it was an idea of like doing real estate investment, buying a property, fixing it up, flipping it, or renting it. Then I would live there and be the landlord. And then, my grandfather, my mother's father, came to him with an idea for a business called Cartridge World, printer cartridges. For all of you out there, don't buy anything from Cartridge World. And don't buy a Cartridge World franchise. So I don't even know if they're still around, but so we started this up. I moved back to Maryland, and I got an apartment. He gave me a job. I got a salary. I got a new car. And I reconnected with my cousin, which was great, but also probably terrible. Him and I are very similar. We tend to amplify each other's problems. So as I'm trying to sort of be responsible and help my dad with this business, on the weekends and weeknight, all the time, I'm hanging out with my cousin. And I think between the two of us, over the course of about a year, we were, I think, arrested like 6 times. Always dumb stuff, bar fights, driving drunk. I stole a bunch of stuff from a 7-Eleven once. well, I mean, beer. It was beer. I sold beer. It was actually kind of a funny story, but there's an off-duty police officer standing right outside of the 7-Eleven. I was in flip-flops, running out with 2 cases of beer. He just jumped on my back, choked me out. I didn't get very far. So I am trying to start this business with my dad, and it was, I mean, this was like the boot camp for the friendship that me and my dad have now. There's nobody else, like, other than maybe my mom, that I trust as much. He has proved himself time and time again to be there, for me, and he's there, like, even if he doesn't know what to do, even if there's nothing he can do, he's, other than just be there.
Can't fake showing up.
Exactly. I am still doing drugs, still drinking, I'm still doing all this stuff, and just too much stress working with my dad because I'm feeling like I'm letting him down. And I'm not showing up to work, showing up hungover, still on drugs. Like, he should have fired me about 100 times. But so I decided that I can't deal with this. I got to do something different. So I decided to quit. That it was, for the best for both of us, preserve our relationship, I guess, that we were working on. Is how I think it went down. So I started working another job. I think I got a job at Office Depot. And then I heard from my friend John from JMU. He was like, "Hey, I'm in Richmond. Should move down. Should get a place." I was like, "Yes, let's do that. I'm on it." And he was like, "Find a place." I was like, "Why don't you find a place? You live there." But so I found a place. It's a 4-bedroom house. Got 2 other guys in there. So I'm 24. I'm in Richmond. It's like bachelor pad. I decide I'm going to go back to school. I'm at the community college there. I took a class in the summer. Things went really well. I got like a B+, and I took another semester. Got like a 4.0. Things were going good. I reconnected with one of my best friends from growing up. It was Jack, and we're having a good time down there. Things are going good, and it's 2008, and so I met this girl in one of my classes, and we started seeing each other. And within like 3 months, one day she kind of just sits me down. She's like, "I'm pregnant." I was like floored, because she was one of the first girls that I ever been with, and I had zero knowledge of how any of that stuff works. I was raised in a very conservative Christian home, so I was opted out of sex ed. I didn't know anything about any of that stuff, and it's no excuse, but I was unprepared, 100% unprepared, and I had a panic attack, like a really bad panic attack, and that was my first inpatient experience in Richmond. I spent I just spent one night there because I told him that I wanted to go home and I felt better because I had been cutting myself, not to kill myself, but self-mutilation, self-harm. It's just like, for me, it was to feel pain so that I knew that I was alive. And so I get out of the hospital, and then within a couple weeks, she tells me that she's had a miscarriage. Because I had taken her to the clinic a couple times. There's something just was off about it. Never let me go inside, and this was, she wouldn't be friends with me on Facebook. Kind of weird. So I still to this day don't know if she was telling the truth, and if she was telling the truth, I don't know if it was mine. It could have been, but I don't know for sure. And that really shook me. And then within the next 6 months, I failed to pay my health insurance, and my health insurance lapsed. And then I tried to reapply for health insurance, and I was denied for pre-existing condition. So the thing that I needed health insurance for now meant, because it was a pre-existing condition, it meant that I couldn't get health insurance for it. So from 2009 to 2013, I had no health insurance. And my healthcare, my prescriptions at one point were about $1,000 a month. And obviously, when you have those kind of expenses, other things have to go. And usually, for me, it was school, so no more school. It was no more, you got to get a cheaper car, you got to get, you got to buy stuff from Costco in bulk, ramen every night. So I started working part-time, and I think started like 25 hours, then 30 hours, then stopped going to school because I bumped it up to 35 hours, then 40 hours. And then there was this period where I wasn't sure, like, how I was going to make ends meet, period. And so I started going to like a free clinic, type of clinic where it's first come, first serve. The doctor's only there on, the second and third Thursdays of the month. So you stand outside 5:30 in the morning, waiting in line with, people who are on the streets. Standing out there in 20-degree weather because that's the only option you have. And when you need to save money, you go, oh, I'm going to take this pill today, and I'll just start taking them every other day. Which, little bit of advice, that's not how medications work. Don't do that. And eventually I was like, well, I got to get a real job with health insurance. Or at least, I got to get some money going. And so I got a job. This place was a textbook company where they buy and sell used college textbooks. And it was a management job. I was a store manager. So I felt, all right, well, this is like a real job. And I was thrown to the wolves, basically. They should have had 2 managers, and I'm working on average 60 hours a week, sometimes 85 or 90. Basically, I was the only person who had a key, so in the store hours is like 8 to 8, 7 days a week. And then sometimes it was 8 to 10. So it was, for somebody who's not medicated properly, is not really in treatment. I remember I would get off work and I didn't have time to go grocery shopping. So for 6 months, I would go to 7-Eleven on my way home, and I would buy like some of those hot, like the hot food that they have, like buffalo wings or whatever that stuff is. I buy a 12-pack of beer, and I would go home, and I would eat, and I would drink all the beer, and I would stand on my 8th floor balcony and just dream about, the day that I would have the guts to jump. It was not a good time for me. It was probably one of my darker periods of my life. After almost a year working there, I just quit. I was like, no, I'm not doing this anymore. I remember it was right after Christmas. I drove all the way back up to Maryland because we were open on Christmas Eve, and we were open on the 26th. And I drove up, hung out, and had to drive back. My car broke down, and I was like, nope, I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. I told my parents, I was like, I'm coming home. I can't do this. So I went back to Maryland, moved in with my parents at the age of, I was 28, 27 or 28. And they were in the middle of a bankruptcy. That's part of the reason why they couldn't help me with my meds and stuff as much as they probably wanted to. And so it didn't get better for me. It got worse. I started to do more drugs, drink more. I had my first like long inpatient day. I was in for like a week at a hospital, psychiatric hospital, Baltimore. And then pretty quickly it was another week. And then another week. And then I was also in outpatient programs they call day hospitals, where essentially you go in the morning and then kind of like school for crazy people. School for crazy people, yeah. You go at 8 and then, you leave around 3 or 4 in the afternoon. And you come back the next day, you do that for a couple weeks. Very, very effective, but definitely reminded me of like going to school. So around this time, while everything is spiraling out of control, I'm stealing money from my parents when they don't have any money. I'm stealing drugs from them. I decide the Sandy Hook shootings happen. And I'm just listening to the news and to the radio and YouTube, and people just keep talking about crazy people. Oh, it's these crazy people. I watch out for these crazy people. And that really bothered me. Like, I'm a crazy. I don't go shooting schools up. And so I decided I wanted to start a nonprofit. So I started a nonprofit that was dedicated to mental health awareness, and we focused on digital media, so social media and all that kind of stuff for the new generations, millennials, younger. And I got some decent attention for it. Baltimore Sun, NPR. I was asked to join the board of directors for another nonprofit. And then, during this whole time, I'm trying to figure out what's going on, and I'm not working, so I turn my illness into a job. I do all the research that I can. I'm good at research, so I just start collecting information, collecting data. Even on myself, there's an app on a phone where you track your moods every day. You can track all kinds of different stuff, your sleep patterns, what you ate. It's all data. I met a couple people through my nonprofit that helped me to find some resources. Two people in particular who also have bipolar disorder, who are both authors. They're very, very smart people. And so I end up getting in touch with Johns Hopkins University. Well, not university, the hospital. And they do a fantastic job with mood disorder research and treatment. And so I do a evaluation with them. And normally with psychiatrists, you get about 15 minutes. Whether you're seeing them the first time or the 150th time. About 15 minutes, you get, the same questions every time. But this was very special because they want you to gather all of your documentation, all of your information. So I think I literally sent them probably about a whole ream of paper of records. They also have you bring people who know you the best so they can provide context for your illness. And we spent about an hour and 45 minutes with this woman, this doctor. And at the end of it, she said, yes, Jared, you're bipolar. You have bipolar disorder. You have bipolar 2. I was like, bipolar 2? And she was like, these meds here that you're on, you don't take them anymore. Here are the ones that you want to be on. I've been on those meds ever since. And I now understand that there are multiple different types of bipolar disorder. Bipolar 1, bipolar 2. There's cyclothymia. So there's not otherwise specified. There's a lot of different diagnoses. So, and they're different. They're very different. And one of the big things that I found out was that traditional antidepressants actually make bipolar disorder worse. And I'd been on them for a decade. So after that, that was huge.
That's just yikes.
Exactly. Yeah, that was my reaction. I think that was my parents' reaction too. They were like, what the heck? Like, how did we not know this? So after Hopkins, things didn't really get better. They started to the seed was planted for things to get better. After that, I entered into a very, very lengthy depression. Even though I had, even those medications had, I was on good medication, was in therapy. There is still the weight of my depression was still so great that even those tools could not support that weight. The thing about psychiatric medications is that they're not designed to bring people out of symptoms. They're designed to keep people out of symptoms.
Hmm.
So once you're in there, once you're deep in there aren't a whole lot of treatments that are designed to get you out. And so I was in a very, very deep depression for about 6 months. So much so that the board of directors position that I had been offered, I resigned. I wasn't working. I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't even drinking or doing drugs or anything. I wasn't doing anything. I just didn't leave the house. I would try to sleep as long as I could. Sometimes I slept 16 or 18 hours a day. And I would try to time it so that I was awake at night, so that I didn't have to interact with anybody. And I would be able to watch 2 or 3 movies in a row, go back to bed. There's something in mental illness called suicidal ideation. Suicidal ideation is that you fantasize about death. You fantasize about not existing anymore. And that's on the road towards being actively suicidal. And I had a lot of experience with suicidal ideation, but very little experience with actual suicide, even though I had attempted suicide twice before that. And this time, because of my 2 failures before, I knew that there are certain types of, or certain methods which are more effective than others. And there is information online, unfortunately, like that you can get, where the lethality of various methods described in detail. So I decided that if I was going to do it, I was going to do it right. I knew where I was going to get a firearm. I knew that I did not want to do it in my parents' home because I knew that it would permanently traumatize them, even more than just the act itself. So I knew that I was going to do it in my car. I knew where I was going to take my car. There's a little spot off this back road near this place that we used to live. And I figured, leave a note so they would, they wouldn't find me like days later, stinking up a car. But then I guess that I'm not sure why I decided to put it on pause for a second. maybe it was just desperation, and that I knew that there's one last thing that I hadn't tried yet. There's one of the people that I had met that became sort of mentors for me that I'd mentioned earlier, in regards to my bipolar disorder, was somebody who had a lot of experience with what's called ECT, or electroconvulsive therapy. Most people are going to be familiar with it through the name electroshock therapy. And probably everyone right now who knows about that is thinking of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, because it's like one of the only examples of that the public can draw on. But I will point out that depiction is incredibly inaccurate, especially in how they perform it in a modern context. So essentially, just to give a little background, ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, is a treatment, the most effective treatment for bringing people out of intense symptoms of either depression, mania, or psychosis. And there is a very high success rate. I think it's like 80% that's in terms of its success rate. So I underwent a series of treatments. The treatments usually are 8 to 10 treatments every other day. You're under full anesthesia, and they give you a little electric shock to your temple, 1 or 2. There's unilateral and bilateral. Bilateral meaning 2 sides of your head. That's what I did. A little bit more intense. And it produces a full grand mal seizure. But you're anesthetized and you're on anti-seizure medication, so you don't really, doesn't look like a seizure. And then you wake up, you don't even experience anything. So I did 8 treatments, and the side effects are pretty hefty. There's memory loss around the event itself, around the treatments. So basically, like, for me, I pretty much remember nothing of January and February of 2016. Pretty much nothing. I have this one little flash of memory because my last day of the treatment was on my birthday, my 32nd birthday, and I remember there being a piece of pie because I told my mom I didn't want cake because I don't like cake and I don't like birthdays. Because you don't, for somebody who lives with depression or a mental illness, birthdays and holidays are often very difficult because they're a reminder of what your life is, what it's not, a reminder of time passing. So I did 8 treatments. It's called an acute series treatment. Short. And amazingly, I came out of those and I wasn't depressed anymore. It's been 6 months, and it totally blew me away. I think me and my parents and my family too all had this collective sigh of relief, like, oh, it worked.
Didn't you at some point, Jared, describe one day you kind of either woke up or just realized that something's different, something's changed?
Oh, yes. Yeah, most definitely. So I don't know where it happened, but and I will, preface this by saying that my experiences with ECT are not common. But the only way that I can explain is that, one, one treatment, I went under one person and I came out somebody else. And I don't mean that like, I'm a different person now because I cut my hair and I got a new job. I mean, the metaphor that I've used in the past is that if your mind is like a house, then what I experienced is that the outside of the house remained the same, but somebody came in, renovated everything, knocked down all the walls, changed the floor plan, redecorated, changed the paint, everything different.
Overnight.
Yep. Yeah. And there's this odd feeling of, being in an unfamiliar space, where it's almost like, if you live somewhere for long enough and you wake up in the middle of the night, you can navigate your way without the lights to the light switch or to the bathroom or whatever it is. But in this case, it was like, you reach out to turn the lights on, or you reach for the handle of the bathroom door or whatever, and there's nothing there. And not only that, you're falling forward down a flight of stairs now. So it's very disorienting. There's nothing that I've ever experienced that's like it. Not even doing psychedelics. So I then did what's called continuous ECT, which is called DECT. Very good acronym. And so I did another 7 treatments, and the idea there is that you do it like once a week, and once every 2 weeks, once a month, and you slowly taper down.
And that's in addition to the 8 you've already done.
Correct.
Okay.
And
just to clarify, Jared, the original 8 ECT treatments, what was the time frame for those? How long did that take?
Well, it was Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Monday, Wednesday.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just straight.
Yep.
Day after day.
Yeah.
Okay.
I may have missed one and they moved it back. I don't know. Like I said, I can't remember.
Gotcha.
So I eventually decided that I just was not going to I didn't want to do any more treatments because something had changed. And I remember thinking to myself that when I first started the treatments, and they would put me under, I would sort of in my mind, I'm thinking like, yes, bring on the sweet darkness. But by the time I was a couple treatments into the continuous ECT, where I would have these panic attacks where I was terrified that I was not going to wake up, or that I was going to wake up and there would be nothing left of who I used to be. And that's when I kind of realized that, I had reattached myself to the idea of life.
You didn't want to die at this point.
Right. Yeah.
That's huge.
Exactly.
You wanted to live.
Yes. Yeah. But it was a weird transition even, for somebody, because when you're in a mental state for long enough, you get used to being there. And even if you're making a positive change, it still can be uncomfortable.
For sure.
So I did 15 treatments, and then I was like, all right, I don't want to do it anymore. And I came out of it and I said to myself, well, what now? What do I do now? How long is this going to last? Because the research shows that, 4 out of 5 people relapse in the first year, and that number only goes up after that. And a relapse would mean that you would relapse back into those same symptoms that you were in before. They might not be as worse, but you relapse. I was like, well, I can't wait to see what happens. I got to do something. And so I was like, well, what do I want to do? And I remember I keep a journal. I've been keeping a journal since I was like a freshman in high school. And I remember writing in the journal, because I've looked back at it multiple times, asking myself, what do I want to do? What do I want to accomplish? What can I accomplish? And so I wrote this list of stuff out that I wanted to try to do, where essentially the answer was I want to pick up where I'd left off all those years before, when I was 19 years old. And I was like, well, first I got to test this out. Got to get a new set of hardware. I got to see what it can do. So I got a part-time job, and it went really, really well. It was the first job that I ended up leaving like a year and a half later, where the management or ownership like actually was like, hey, come back anytime. That was not the case in a lot of past jobs. Yeah.
To end on good terms.
Yeah, exactly. So so the job was going well. So I was like, all right, well, I got to do this school thing, because if I don't finish this, I'm never going to be happy. Never going to be satisfied. Something I got to do. So I took a summer class at a community college. I got an A. I was super excited about that. I was like, all right, well, that went really well. Well, let's push my luck. Let it ride, kind of. Like, let's do, how about finish my associate's degree? And I knew that I only needed one semester worth of classes at the community college. So I did that, and ended up getting a 4.0. And it was around that time, that during that semester, that I was like, it's been 6 months and I've had 0 symptoms. And for me, that never happened. For me, it was 6 to 8 weeks tops, at the best.
Was that just like that realization, 6 months, just, I guess, almost like cathartic, just crazy?
It was definitely crazy. It was like, because it was something that was so far outside of the norm that even my parents were like, what is going on? I was starting to get this, like, I was like, am I cured? Like, what happened? Like, I think my mom was even like, is he better now? Like, it was kind of this feeling like we didn't want to like embrace it.
Because you were afraid it would come back.
Yeah.
It was just like, no way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It was like when is this going to come back?
Did that worry you?
Oh yeah. It was.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something I'm still.
Mm-hmm.
I talked to my therapist about that just 2 or 3 weeks ago. Is this idea that I've been waiting for this inevitable collapse, and that was 3.5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I eventually, about halfway through the semester, it did come back. Depression showed up. But what was amazing about it was that it was the severity of the symptoms was nothing like what it was before. It was there, and I actually felt kind of better about like knowing where it was. Like, okay, I see you. You can't sneak up on me. And but it was like, normal depressive episode for me would have been minimally 10 days. This didn't even classify as a depressive episode, because a depressive episode has to last at least 5 days, or at least a week. Actually, technically, I think it's 2 weeks. I don't know. But this was like 3 days in and out. And I was like, is this the new normal? And I was like, if it is, the game's changed. So I I got a 4.0. Graduated summa cum laude with my at the community college. I was like, let's do it. Like, I'm gonna finish my bachelor's finally. So I applied to 2 different schools, got into both of them. Both good schools, and I went with the one that could graduate me in 3 semesters instead of 4.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was there, I met some really, really amazing people. It's different being a non-traditional student. You appreciate your time in school better because, 1, you're paying for it, and 2, you're closer in age. Well, you can relate more to your professors. And one of my professors ended up becoming one of my mentors and friends. I took a class with him initially on Introduction to Judaism. And I initially went into the class thinking to myself, I was like, I want to learn what the Jews think about the Christians, because the Jews have, kind of been treated pretty shitty by them. So I wanted to be like, you don't like these people either, do you? No, I was like, because I don't like them. You definitely shouldn't like them. And I was really amazed. I think that where I'm at, now, in terms of how I believe and how I interact with people of other faiths, is pretty heavily influenced by this guy, because when I talked to him and I asked him about it, he was incredibly gracious about it, and actually was pointing out things that he admired, and I was like, wait a minute, what are you? I'm like, no, that's not what you're supposed to say. So I ended up taking another 3 classes with him, 2 of them being independent studies. Ended up spending time in his home with his family. Learned a lot about Judaism, fairly knowledgeable, at least for the average, like, person who grows up in a Christian, at least. And what was amazing was that as I was healing from these treatments, from the years and years and years of being symptomatic and, being depressed and all the stuff surrounding it, is that I began to investigate the idea that belief in itself is valuable, and that atheism, of which I would have described at that point and before that, is actually harmful, because people who have nothing to believe in tend to be more susceptible to a mental health problem. There's a relationship there that I'm going to get into the details of it, but there is a powerful connection between what I experienced with my treatments and understanding other people's beliefs, which led me to the place where I began to reevaluate my own belief, or at least to look at the idea of belief in a fresh sort of way. And the more research that I've done on the mind neurology, on various religions. I've come to realize that, belief is an important part of how the human mind operates. And it's a genetic, it's a biological thing. There's a reason why our ancestors survived, because when they heard something in the bushes, they believed that there was something there, and they were the ones that ran away first. It's that simple. So whatever that mechanism is, I was wondering, how is that how is it working in my own head, in me? And I had to look, and this was a very recent observation, is that I've been trying to explain the success of the treatments that I had, because I've never relapsed. Nearly everybody relapses. The profound shift in identity is unique. The fact that I felt like a different person. The fact that some of my memories I associate are just gone. Other memories I have no emotional connection to. It's like I'm thinking somebody else's memories.
As if they're just like data.
Yeah, it's just like you're looking at somebody else's home movies. You're like, who's that person? So all these phenomena are sort of led me to want to learn, what is going on? What happened in my head? And I've now contacted and gone back and forth with some of the leading minds in this field, in the world, and the answer I got was, we don't know. And as much as I hate to admit it, if you were to describe an event to someone, and you were to say, this particular event changed my life, changed everything about me, changed the way I see the world, how I interact with the world, and it's unexplainable by science, what would be the word that you would use to, to describe that event? My dad was like, well, that's easy. The word is miracle. The word you're looking for is miracle. And I cringe when I hear that word, because for a long time I've been very angry about the church, because it failed me. Christianity failed me. It didn't have an explanation, didn't have an avenue to get better. It didn't help my family. Somehow some of them, clung to their faith, but their faith is nothing like it was when this all started 16 years ago. And I think each one of them would admit that my illness changed them. I developed, one of my sisters, my younger sister, we developed a metaphor for my illness and my family. And essentially it goes like this: is that our house is on fire, and I am stuck in my room, and the door blocked. I can't get out. And my parents are trying desperately to open the door to help me to get out. to get me out of the house. And of course, they're very focused on that. And my older sister, she very smart, and but she's able to get out of her room, and she runs out of the front of the house and gets out. And then and then she spends she dedicates her life or spends her a lot of her life learning to understand house fires. Sister is a therapist. My younger sister, is she's locked in her room, and my younger brother's locked in his room. My younger brother, he's very independent. He opens up the window and jumps out the second floor and takes off, and he's fine. And my younger sister, not at any fault of anybody else, but my parents end up getting me out, cracking the door just enough for me to get out, and we all rush out, and everybody forgets about my younger sister, and the house burns down on her. I think it's a very apt metaphor. But it's only now am I beginning to see like some healing taking effect, I guess, taking shape. I mean, when you deal with something like this for so long, it only, can only like affect the people around you, the people that care about you the most. And even though like I know it's not my fault, still it's hard to see what that did to those people. The only thing I do now is just help in that healing process. Be there for them the way that they were there for me.
Mm-hmm. Jared, as I look back through your story, I see some parallels that takes place here. And first I want to go back and with the whole church thing. What could have been different there? What should have been different in that whole experience as a younger man with church that may have changed something, may have changed the trajectory of your life going forward? What should have been better? What should have been different?
Well, I mean, I can only speak for maybe what would have helped me.
Mm-hmm.
But I would have to say that there would have needed to been a gifted program in the church, the way that there was in schools. When we were, I was growing up in elementary school and middle school, they would pull us out of the class, once a week, and we'd spend the day doing other stuff. So, I was building bridges and rocket ships and, learning about physics when I was, 8 years old. And that kept me interested. So I don't know if that's something that model could work in the church, where it's like, well, this young person or this person in general, they're, maybe they're on a different level than everybody else. They're asking deeper questions. They're asking more technical questions, and then have an avenue for and people who are able to engage with them. I know that if I had time to spend one-on-one with, somebody with a degree, from seminary, like I would have, even in middle school and high school, like I would have loved that, because I could have at least engaged with somebody who was my intellectual equal.
So this wasn't necessarily an issue. You weren't getting answers to the questions that you were asking. It's not that they weren't there. It just wasn't at a level that filled you, that satisfied what you were looking for. Does that sound fair?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's very fair. Because the thing about like intellectual pursuit and the church is that they often don't meet at all. Um, yeah, and there is a whole nother world surrounding the study of the Bible, which is incredibly fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Which um, I think can be used as a tool instead of sort of shying away from it, which then most people, I mean, I think if you speak to most atheists, most Christian atheists, people who were Christians and became atheists, because there actually are atheists who were other religions and became, um, they would all say that, the information that they were given was inadequate. And so they had to go get the information on their own. So there was nobody there to put that information in context. Say, okay, yeah, so the the gospel narratives of the crucifixion are all different. Why are they different? Here's
Yes.
the context.
So you weren't getting those answers that at the time you were interpreting because you weren't getting them. There wasn't an answer for it.
Yeah, there wasn't an answer, or they were holding answers from me. They're all liars. Yeah.
That would be an easy conclusion.
What I kind of got from that part of the conversation was it's as if just the often mechanical procedures of the church dictated, oh, well, Jared can't take the creation class because he's not old enough and blah, 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 because the books, our made up book rather says to do it this way, rather than to personally engage, like you said, almost like if there was something for gifted people. But that could really just boil down to, is the church even being personable at all?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think in order to understand people's gifts, you have to understand them. Like
Precisely.
you have to put the effort into not just giving them here's the formulaic sort of rubric that I'm going to give everybody. Like that's not we're individuals. Like the way that I see God is different than the way that you see it. Even for people who fall under the same umbrella, you know, it's different. But, you got to approach it differently.
I want to ask you, Jared, there was this place that stands out to me in your journey where you were on a retreat and you went off the trail. You wanted to go on your own trail. You needed to get away from the group. And you came up with this ultimatum to God.
Mm-hmm.
Either show up or I'm walking. Do you think that maybe God did show up, but later or in a different way than you at the time was thinking he should have? Do you see or sense at this point in time is maybe in reflecting back, now that in some sense you've had this reboot, maybe he was there. Maybe something was there that has brought me on this journey. And I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but as I look through your story here and even your relationship as it was with your dad, you were angry at him at some point. You felt like he wasn't checking, he checked out on you, but then that changed too. Were you angry, and is that anger that kind of things like because God didn't come and save you from this, that has that played a role in this perhaps to some degree?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, yes, definitely. For a very, very, very long time, I was angry, very angry at God. Still believed in God,
Mm-hmm.
and I was angry because, like you said, I they didn't save me.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you do this? You didn't save me. And I think there were a lot of relationships like that.
Yep.
I had, my dad, my mom. Like I was angry at both of them for a long time. I'm like, why did you give this to me? Why did I deserve this? Like, and obviously they had no control over
Mm-hmm.
any of this, but I think the way I'm starting to look at this all now is, and this really kind of just struck me literally just this second, is like if you go back to the the moment that I had on the beach with my friend John, is that maybe God, or whatever you want to call it, the divine, force, um, maybe that big circle that I drew was ECT, and what if God had, or the divine had, saved me in that moment that I was there on that path in the woods, then he would have been the one slashing that line across.
Mm-hmm.
I never would have gotten there.
Interesting. If you would have swam out to those boats that day, that night, what would have happened?
I'm a pretty good swimmer. I probably would have got bored and then swam back, is probably what would have happened.
After 100 yards or so?
About 200 or 300 yards, I'm like, never mind. I don't need to prove this.
Yeah, they're much further out there than I thought. Yeah. But it may not have ended up well.
Yeah, it certainly could not have. But what I'm seeing now with all of this is that on the surface, this is all awful. Mental illness is awful.
Mm-hmm.
It destroys people, destroys family members. But in my case, a very unique case, there has been, and there is now, the opportunity for great healing to happen. And I've been given this very bizarre gift. I still don't understand what it is. I still don't understand why I was given it. But this probably sounds strange, but I wouldn't change anything about it.
And with other people that have been on this show have said the same thing. And I think Steve and I, even in our stories with our own version of suffering, though very, very, very different from yours, would also say the same. Don't change it. The big circle you drew, I see in that your story itself to be told.
Really? Okay. All right. Well, yeah. I mean, I like telling stories. I guess this is as good as a story as any.
Yeah.
It's an excellent story.
Yeah. And in that, design out there on the beach in the sand there, it was about purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And that you had a purpose in life. And until that was met, fulfilled, that there's no way you're going to die. At least that's how I. What about now? What's your purpose? I mean, you're sitting here, you're telling folks a story about your life that there are going to be pieces of it that people are going to identify with. And go, oh my gosh, help me. What's your word to them?
Tough question. I guess that that even when you are in the darkest places, there's still a chance for light. And amazingly enough, when you are in the dark, the utter dark, for long enough, the tiniest flicker of light will look like a spotlight.
Mm.
So look for it. It'll be there. You gotta keep looking.
Mm.
Would you say that, but that when you see it, you've got to want it?
I think that the desire, at least in the sense of when dealing with mental illness, desire is not necessarily the thing that's going to make the difference.
Mm-hmm.
At least not yours. Often it's the desire of those around who care.
Gotcha.
And if they, if they're able to, if they want it bad enough, and you maybe get lucky a little bit, I think there is a little bit of luck involved in it.
But you also said that, and you've asked people at Hopkins, the guys in the know, what happened? And the best they can come up with, it's a mystery. We don't know. So the question, as we kind of bring this to a landing here, is where does hope come from?
Where does hope come?
You said a little bit earlier it comes from belief.
I think you're right. I think maybe I'm right.
Sure.
Hope is something that is like a star. You need all the pieces. Like if you go back to the beginning of the universe, there's all this cosmic dust floating around. And then as gravity affects it, everything's drawn together, and under great pressure, strain, force, suddenly there's a spark. And there's a star. I think hope is a lot like that. You have to have the components for it to manifest itself, because it's not something that you can force into being. Just
or manufacture yourself.
Yeah, it happens.
Yeah.
You know,
but it does exist.
The conditions have to be right. Yeah, and if they are right, then there's a good chance that you'll get a star.
And in some cases, we call it a mystery.
Yep.
Great. Jared, this has been, Luker, you got something on your mind?
Reminded of a quote from my philosophy professor that was just about marveling and appreciating the mystery. That it's not always something to be figured out, but it is something to be marveled and wondered at. And that is a good thing.
Yeah, I agree.
But what I've heard you say and allude to, and even some of the things that you've told me recently, is that maybe you're revisiting some of these things that, or maybe even this God who you gave an ultimatum to in the past to show up, or I'm walking. Maybe you're circling back around to see if you missed him, or he was there. Is that sort of true?
Yeah, I think so. I'm thinking that maybe I didn't have the right vocabulary first time around. Maybe the language Christianity that I was given, of Christianity as a whole, was not the right language for me to be communicating with God or with the divine. It doesn't mean just because you can't understand somebody doesn't mean they're not there.
Yeah.
So
sometimes Christianity just gives us boxes to check off, and maybe he's a whole lot bigger than boxes.
Yeah, I agree.
Jared, any last thing you want to say as we depart tonight? Because this has been an incredible journey. And it's amazing that you could sit here and say, I wouldn't change a thing about it. I'm just thinking I would. I'm not.
It's the mystery.
Yeah.
Well, I guess maybe one idea, sort of wrap everything together, is there's this guy, his name is Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. He was Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. He was a head rabbi of the United Kingdom at one point. And he gives this amazing talk on the nature of suffering and what its purpose is, and sort of the idea of how. And it's a question we all try to wrap our head around. How is God all good if everybody is suffering all the time? And he points out something really interesting, that Judaism is a religion of protest. That the first Jew is not Noah or Adam, Abraham, who says, "No, God, I'm not going to do that." And it's that suffering that God puts him through that makes him special.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an odd sort of gift, but when you look at like most stories of these amazing people, like look at like Nelson Mandela. Suffering turns us into something greater. I think somebody said suffering makes us more noble.
Yes.
So, yeah, that's probably my last idea.
Like a crucible.
Yeah.
Do you get refined in the fire into a greater material?
Exactly. Yeah.
Jerry, we want to thank you tonight for being a part of Restless, the podcast. This has been an fantastic journey that touched in a lot of areas that we just haven't heard yet. And we want to thank you for that. And, please stay in touch and just let us know how this journey continues and in the words that you've said, and even down the road, how that might reach out to folks just like yourself that are still somewhere in that darkness.
Yeah.
Does that sound fair?
Yeah, definitely.
Yes,
I like that.
Great.
It's been a marvel among marvels.
Thanks for being with us
Thanks,
tonight.
guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to episode 9 of Restless the Podcast, featuring Jared, titled Off the Trail. We here at Restless the Podcast have hearts restless to find the one who said, "Come to me all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." For whom is your heart restless? And for today, who can give your heart the answers it seeks?